Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. On behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we would like to thank all of our sponsors who have continued to support the symposium during this very challenging year. Before we thank our partners, we'd like to ask that sometime during the symposium's breaks that you visit our partners' virtual booths. You can also visit the Content Hub on the MIT CDOIQ website for some great partner resources. We'd like to thank the following partners: Deloitte, Informatica, Privacy Analytics, CDOIQ, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Sandal Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Wakira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global IDs, Snowflake, Starburst. And as I said, please make every effort to visit our partners, use the virtual passport, because without them and our partner support, the symposium could not be held. Thank you.
So thanks everyone. So Michael, just while we wait on your PowerPoints, what I'm going to do is just do a quick introduction, pass it over to you to entertain our audience for just a minute while I bring your PowerPoints up. But let me just introduce you. So this is session 5B, New Data Analytics Frontiers for the DoD. And at the beginning of 2019, the MIT Symposium had you. We were pleased to have you as one of our keynote speakers. And you were discussing some of the challenges you faced then. Now, after a year of progress, we understand you're now the department's first Chief Business Analytics Officer, which marks a shift in your journey towards a higher data quality and leveraging data analytics. Our understanding of this presentation will explore both of those topics. So, Michael, if you can maybe talk about that while I just load up your PowerPoint, we should be good to go.
Absolutely. I'm happy to talk about that because I think it's important to provide a little bit of context to our audience. So I've been with the department for 2 years. As we all know, a typical chief data officer is in the role for about 18 months. And so I was due for a change. And happily, this change came out of the fact that we had had considerable success getting our data under control. We addressed availability, we addressed quality, we addressed a number of different challenges, and had gotten to a level of reasonable maturity with respect to the defense business enterprise. That's everything from financial management to human resources to acquisition, logistics and supply chain, all the typical kinds of things any large enterprise does. And the department, like the rest of government, has those basic business functions. Well, we made a heck of a lot of progress in getting our business-oriented data, the data by the operations management department, under control. And so we've now been able to turn our attention to analyzing that data, using it to generate insights to improve the performance of the department. So my responsibilities and my title have shifted away from purely data to being a focus on analytics and generating insights to improve the performance of the defense business enterprise. So Chief Business Analytics Officer, meant to be very clear in terms of contrast with the prior role. And we have had considerable success. We are now to the point where our senior most executive meetings are no longer conducted with PowerPoints or PDFs that have been generated by hand over a 3-4 month period. We're now looking at live visualizations of analytics of real-time data. And that is part of a bigger set of cultural changes that we have made real progress with in the department. Now, we all know that the first set of changes you have to tackle are not about the technology, they're not about the techniques, they're about the culture, and we have made some significant level of progress on that. Now, last year I came to this group and we opened the conference and I talked about some of these challenges that we were a year into at that point, how we had created a vision for a shared service that would provide the leaders of the department with what we refer to as evidence-based decision-making, evidence being data that's been statistically validated and analyzed. It comes out of some of the legislation for the federal government. So we talked about the fact that we are creating a shared service where this data was brought together with analytics made available, and it is now being used on an ongoing basis for the senior most decision making for across the department. This is it's already changing the culture in a significant way, changing behavior in a significant way. And most importantly, from my own selfish perspective, it's generating an even higher appetite, a higher level of demand for additional data, improved data quality, and further maturity in data analytics, in visualization, in storytelling. Robert, if you could take us ahead to slide 4. What I'm going to talk about now is some of the major vectors of the change we have been executing over the last 2 years. And these are updates from the way I've discussed these vectors a year ago.
And Michael, just to confirm, this is your slide that you wanted me to go to, yeah?
Yeah, so you're currently on the title slide. That's the correct deck. If I could ask you, let's please go ahead to slide 4.
Which is data as a strategic asset. I think I'm on that slide.
It says, well, what I'm seeing on the screen is still the title slide. What I was hoping to see on the screen was a slide that says Transformation Vector 1, from tables to storytelling.
Okay, I'm there, but let me just ask Rod. Rod, are you seeing that as well?
No, I'm seeing that title slide. You want to stop sharing and then start it up again?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. Let me go.
No, this is how people know we're doing this live.
Yeah. Oh, very, very nicely put.
There it is.
Okay, so we're good?
We're absolutely good. And by the way, I meant that. You know when you're doing something live if you run into problems. In fact,
yes.
The first time we did a live analytics exercise in front of the very senior most body in the department, we ran into problems, and they were technical problems, of course. Anyway, this happens, and it's how you know you're working live. So let me talk about some of the transformation vectors that we've been working on. Transformation Vector 1, this is all about the change from the department's traditional approach to data, which is about spreadsheets, SQL databases, and tabular reports. And we all know that tabular reports are wonderful, but they're very dry. They don't tell you direction. They don't tell you velocity. They don't tell you the things that you really care about. They give you snapshots in time. And one of the cultural challenges we had to overcome was this appetite for tabular reports and spreadsheets. What you see on the right side is how we leveraged an unfortunate set of circumstances that the entire world is coping with, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've created a common operating picture of the COVID pandemic, its impact on the US and its impact on the Department of Defense. Specifically at the request of the senior most executives in the department. And this is a subset of the visualizations that they look at every single morning. They track a global picture, a US picture, state by state, county by county. They track cases, tests, PPE, respirators, hospitals, you name it. A wide range of things out into the department's supply chain. In fact, when we put this set of pictures together, and there are 50 or 60 live analytics in the real environment, when we put this picture together, we were able to see issues in our suppliers' supply chain that were compromising their ability to respond, and we saw them before the suppliers did. Now, I'd love to name names, but this is, as you might imagine, just a little sensitive, and we're not trying to make anybody look bad, but the point is that we were able to highlight these kinds of vulnerabilities that even the firms that supply us weren't necessarily aware of. These are all self-service in their nature, these visualizations. So you go into this common operating picture, You can see these visualizations. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. You can choose to focus on specific elements. You can turn them into tables if you really want to. And this is part of how we coax people through the change. But as you can see from the graphs we've selected, whether it's a map or these other ones, this is all about tracking change in progress. Right? When you do a plot, the point you are today on the XY coordinates is much less important than the slope of the line or the overall trend that you're looking at. And then that's why I've chosen these particular visualizations to share with you. People want to see the trends. They want to see the locality of actions, and thus the map you see at the top. Now, what you may find difficult to see, but is really important in terms of cultural change and storytelling, is what's in the lower left-hand corner of every graph. It shows the source. It shows when it was updated, when the data was pulled, when the analytics were run, and it shows and gives you the ability to track the provenance of every single analytic. And this is critical when you're trying to build credibility and trying to develop a culture of data and statistical literacy. Now, our executives are really smart. They're experienced, they're educated, PhDs, master's degrees, you name it. These are smart people, but they didn't have a lot of background in statistics. They didn't have a lot of background in analytics, and certainly not a lot of background in data quality. And so we've built in a number of little techniques that let them zoom in on the provenance of almost anything that we show them. We don't typically go down to the code level, but we could if we chose to do that. So this is one of the major vectors of changing the way the department's executives communicate with each other, as well as communicate outside, moving from tables and tabular reports to storytelling through modern visualizations and modern graphics. So Robert, if we could go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the next element, the next transformation vector, transformation vector 2. What you see on the left, this graph diagram, is actually a map of our financial management application systems. And as you can tell from the look of that thing, that's a bit of a hairball. We have over 300 systems, not just applications, but systems of applications managing our financials across the Department of Defense. Some of that code at the heart of that hairball is 58 years old. And, then there's a layer of 57-year-old code and 56-year-old code and so forth. Well, the challenge is that you have all of that heterogeneity, and every one of those little blue dots is a tiny slice of the total financial picture. What we had to do was unify it. We had to go and create a common schema that would map to all of those different sources, and for the first time create this view of the department's costs and performance from one end to the other: Army, Navy, Air Force, all the defense agencies and field activities. Because without that common view, without that common enterprise data schema, and that's a proper noun for us, common enterprise data, without that schema, what you had was arguments about which data was accurate, which data was correct, which data was timely. And everybody thought, my data is better than your data, and my formulas are better than your formulas, and my math is better than your math, and all that kind of silliness. So the catchphrase, that's data fratricide, when data fights with data, and you spend the meeting fighting about data instead of making a decision. Well, we have largely cured that, and that's what I was talking about in my introductory remarks. We created this thing called common enterprise data. And on the right-hand side, you see this massive element of a dashboard that we've created for our defense agencies and field activities, with 28 of these things. And you can see a wide range of statistics and numbers being used to give a view, into a common view, into every single defense agency and field activity. And this view can be imposed even on the Army, Navy, and Air Force to permit you to compare performance, to compare cost, to compare affordability for any one part of the department with any other part of the department. And that is something that we've accomplished over the last 2 years that was still a work in progress just a year ago. So we've had enormous traction, and that traction is part of what's enabled us to get ourselves positioned in these kinds of executive decision making meetings and conversations I was talking about earlier. But without that, we were stuck with data fratricide. We were stuck with lots of arguments about whose data we can use to make a decision. And it was the blind man and the elephant kind of a conversation every single time. So enormous progress here, and a building block, a fundamental enabler for a higher level of literacy and maturity in the use of data. So let's talk about transformation vector 3, because it built on transformation vector 2. Once we could create that common view, we could begin the hard work of projecting the future. You all know that most measures in many organizations are lagging indicators of performance. And that's a necessary building block. You cannot identify leading indicators unless you have proven lagging indicators to calibrate them against. And you need good quality data in both the lagging space and the leading space if you're going to be able to train your algorithms to do the analysis, to find correlation, then to establish causality, to understand what your comfort levels are, and so forth. We had to do those hard yards of laying the foundation of lagging indicators of performance so that we could then build an appetite for projections into the future. And this transformation vector is all about that. How do we identify and encapsulate those leading indicators to begin to give our leaders useful, valuable projections into the future? Now, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that there are two very distinctly different models being imposed on the same graph, the reddish pink line and the blue line. And this is part of the attitude that we've brought to the table, that there is no one right answer, that all models are wrong, but some models are useful, and that you're best off when you have two or more models of contrasting structure, contrasting sources, and you're using them to paint a bigger picture of the space you're trying to understand. Because the likelihood of only one of them being correct is actually quite low. The second reason you do it is that we can now mathematically prove that any combination of two models is superior in terms of result, quality of insight, than only one model. In fact, this is a mathematical measure of diversity. And we can demonstrate, and academicians have demonstrated in quantitative terms, that two models having diversity is actually superior to give you better results. But philosophically, we already knew that. Philosophically, we're already on this path. And so many of the circumstances where we've created these models, and again, these are COVID-19 oriented models, we're back to those, we emphasize having multiple models from multiple sources with an ability to click down and see, and you can see some of the documentation on the right side of that lower right-hand graphic, some of the documentation of where that the highlighted line comes from, the sources of data, et cetera. You could highlight the other line and get the provenance of that. But the critical thing here is more models juxtaposed against one another is going to give you a more informative picture, better for decision making, better for conversations. And so you can see here some examples of that, but they're about predicting the future off of a small number of data points related to the past. So anybody in the audience who has trained a machine learning algorithm, done feature discovery, all the way through hyperparameter tuning, all of the things that are fun to do, knows what I'm talking about in terms of the challenge of getting good enough quality data, figuring out where the leading indicators are and what they look like and what kinds of correlations there are, what kinds of causality there might be. Getting a group of executives and decision makers who have only ever had backward looking data and had it in tables to accept forward looking projections in graphical form has been a really interesting journey. Again, these are smart people and they have an appetite for wanting to be able to predict and project. But we've been opportunistic, and it's important to be opportunistic to respond to your executive leadership team's priorities. And in this case, I'm using these examples from the department's response to COVID-19 because this was our opportunity to glom onto a priority. So you can see, we have some really interesting graphics here. We don't create all of these. We harvest these from a number of external sources. The DoD has a COVID-19 task force, which is part of the larger federal government COVID-19 task force. And not only were we collaborating with our peers in other parts of the federal, state, and local government, and also with international governments, we're not neglecting the important social element of this either. We've fostered the creation of a community of interest around the COVID-19 pandemic with a slightly larger community that's focused around responding to natural disasters. Because we know this isn't going to be the last pandemic. We know this won't be the last natural disaster we have to cope with. So we're inculcating communities of interest around this kind of modeling, around this kind of data, around these kinds of analytics and visualizations, so that what we've done is not just specific to COVID-19. We've created a COVID-19 response, which is foundational to our future preparedness for the next pandemic and for the next natural disaster. And we've done that in parallel with this transformation vector of getting people to be able to accept looking at multiple views, predicting the future, and be able to judge which of those multiple views are more useful or less useful in a given circumstance. So this is one of those elements of transformation that tends to get rather less attention than it needs to across the government, because across the government, we're in many places still grappling with describing the past, that data fratricide issue that I described. And it's not until you conquer that you can move ahead into predicting the future, which we've tackled here. Let me move on to transformation vector number 4. Transformation vector number 4 is in the context that a lot of what we do with data science is similar to what we do with IT and software engineering. It's similar in terms of the technical disciplines. It's also similar in terms of the project and program management disciplines, and it's similar in terms of the acquisition disciplines. Now, anybody that's ever done business with the federal government has heard about the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. And it's a whole bunch of rules about the way in which you buy goods, the way in which you buy services, services like data engineering, software engineering, et cetera. We weren't satisfied with the complexity and bureaucracy of the FAR. Our friends in Congress also gave us the Defense FAR, the DFAR, which is further constraints and specifications and details and guidelines and bureaucracy about how you buy IT goods and services, data-oriented goods and services. And it's all about a 1988 model, literally, I'm not making that part up, it comes out of the Klinger-Cohen Act. All of the treatments around anything related to IT and data comes out of that. 1988 technique, waterfall systems development life cycle, not only in terms of your process models, your project models, your staffing, and the way you buy, which ties back to those process and project models. Well, we had to really, really clean that up because the half-life of techniques and tools in the world of data science is 6 to 9 months. And that means that in 12 to 18 months, most of what we're doing will be done differently with different tools. And when we first introduced that reality to my colleagues in the department, we had a lot of shock and horror we had to overcome. But eventually we got people to understand that this is actually good. This rate of change, this fast pace of innovation is powerful, and we need to adopt it. And that meant remediating the contracting language that forced us to do the old-fashioned style of buying, remediating the program and project process models and work breakdown structures, and introducing a whole new set of tooling. Think of DevSecOps, right? You see the expression I've used here, DataSecOps. That's a play on DevSecOps. And you need a whole set of tooling and a pipeline for both your software and for your data that enables you to rapidly innovate. You need a tool for your requirements. You need a tool for scheduling and for managing issues. You need a repository for your data like you need a repository for your code. You need a range of these tools available to you to create an actual pipeline that pushes functionality through the development to production cycle with high quality through automation. The same for pushing not just your code, but your data. Again, high quality through automation. And what you see here are some screen grabs out of the tool chain that we have put in place to enable us to run, so we run, I'll break it down from the big picture. We run 4-month-long increments. Each increment is made up of 2-week sprints. And within a 2-week sprint, we might turn daily scrums, producing functionality that can go into production in 24 hours. Now, what I just said still shocks and horrifies a lot of people in the department because we have this, it's called authority to operate. Anytime you touch an IT asset and change it, you have to put it through a safety and security review process. That's good. The challenge is that process runs 18 months long. Now, if I want to produce new functionality every 4 months or every 2 weeks or every day and put it into production, I kind of got a problem with an 18-month life cycle. And part of the set of changes we had to coach people through was how do we validate that this tooling I'm showing you outputs from actually gives you the control, the security, the cybersecurity that you want by automating all of the parameters that are necessary to give you a very secure environment. So this isn't just tooling. This was winning hearts and minds. This was cultural change to get this put into place. And before this happened, everything was managed by email. Now we're using modern tools. I generally get yelled at if I name them, but just for fun. GitHub for managing code, Jira for managing our requirements and our trouble tickets, Confluence for scheduling and that kind of thing. The usual things. You can pick your own. But this was part of the support that we had to put in place to enable the change to get us where we are today. So that's transformation vector number 4. Let's talk about transformation vector number 5. You've heard me mention culture, and I'm going to come back to culture over and over. I talk frequently to my peers, both in the federal government and in, well, we would say in industry, you might say in the commercial sector. One of the biggest challenges that every CDO I've spoken to over the last 6 months has highlighted to me is the issue of cultural change. And this is true in the Department of Defense as well. We're trying to inculcate a culture that is based around evidence. Now, evidence is a technical term and I'm quoting from a really important piece of federal legislation called the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. Fundamentally, I got to have solid data that I have statistically analyzed and proved that it is a fair and accurate representation of the real world. And then I've got to apply analytics to that data to generate insights that I can statistically validate as fair and accurate as both reliable and accurate. And all the things we do, confusion matrices and confidence intervals and p-values and r-values and all those kinds of tradecraft that we take for granted. We're not taken for granted by many of the decision makers in the department because statistics hadn't been part of their training and certainly hadn't been part of their recent experience. So we, in order to develop a culture of evidence-centered decision making, in order to educate, or let's just say increase the literacy of our executives around what does good quality data look like? How do you know it when you see it? This is a tricky one because as you and I know, there's no truth in data, and all data has flaws. So the question is not, is this good quality data in some abstract way? It's how good is the quality of this data? Is it good enough for my purpose today? Is it good enough for the decision I want to make? And how long will it be good? How much confidence can I have in this decision and for how long? And when am I going to need to revisit this? Because the world's going to keep on changing whether we like it or not. So creating hey, you got to value data. Data is really important. You got to make decisions on the basis of statistically validated data. And at the same time, saying, but only for so long, is an interesting tightrope to walk on. Part of what we had to do as we worked our way through this was emphasize domain-specific data and analytics, depending on who the audience was, and give them the things that they care about related to the challenges that they see day in and day out as part of their job, but also introduce them to more modern visualizations. Over on the left-hand side, you can see we're showing you a Sankey diagram that is showing the flow of equipment and PPE related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Not everybody is from the Sankey diagram. And the first time you show something like this to an executive audience and they get a chance to see not a static picture, not a what's the, what was the starting distribution, but the actual shifts and flows is an exciting moment for those executives, because it's not often that the tabular formats would come anywhere like the richness of this kind of a visualization. Now, a subset of a bigger picture. If we were live on the screen, well, we couldn't do that because we're not allowed to use Zoom for Department of Defense business. So forgive me, I got to show you a static view. We could zoom in on this. We can click any number of self-service buttons in this environment and down to a specific item, not just a type of item, but a specific item. And you can see the power that starts to generate for people, and the credibility it starts to generate for us as data practitioners when we are attempting to build a culture of evidence-centered decision-making. And again, evidence is about data statistically validated and then statistically analyzed. It was also important to support that cultural change, that we can provide solid evidence, solid insight to the provenance of the data. So what you see on the right-hand side, those two quick screen grabs, are about the provenance of the diagrams we've seen all along. I've zoomed in the upper right. You can see I've zoomed in, see the date for the latest model run. You can see the as of date, you can see a description of the model, you can see an articulation of how the model works, and all of this is generated by code. No human being has sat down and entered any of this. We expect this from the sources, private, from the content that we get. We use code to do that, and code populates the provenance for us. That makes certain that we don't drift out of date, that we don't lose the current state, and that we don't waste a lot of human beings' time populating text. That just is not a good use of human beings' time. You can also see an extract on the right-hand side, the lower of the two graphics. That's out of our data catalog. And so you can see down at the field level, the transpositions that the data goes through in the curation process. And if we were doing this live, you could click in and see increasing levels of detail as we take original data from multiple sources and combine it, just as I talked about with respect to common enterprise data. Now, I don't want to confuse things. That term common enterprise data is about business data. This particular model is for externally sourced data, but providing the provenance is really important if you want to build a culture of evidence-centered or data-centered decision-making, and exposing new insights is also equally important. Many of you, for many of you, this will not be particularly new, but it is a sense of where we are in the department that this was new and is now becoming relatively well accepted and frequently asked for. And this is a common way of looking at a lot of things now. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about transformation vector numbers. Accomplishing all of this, that DevSecOps pipeline that I talked about, the automation that's extracting the provenance that I talked about, validity checks, security checks, all of that, required us to create a really rich plug-and-play tool set. Typically, I have to emphasize the subtitle on this slide. This is not meant as an endorsement of any specific products. It's just that I find it's more useful to people if I cite specific examples of the tools. You can use whatever one you want. We built this architecture with the express ability to pluck any of these tools out and replace it with a competitor. So if you look, let's see, we have Click in here because we use Click for visualizations. I could just as easily pluck out Click, stick in Power BI. I could stick in Tableau. That's true in all of these instances. What was critical for us was avoiding vendor lock-in skill sets. And I have to clarify, I'm a technologist. I actually am pretty dismissive of the concept of vendor lock-in from a technical perspective. There are bigger issues that cause lock-in, and technology has little to do with those. Anybody that thinks they're ever going to yank their current ERP system out and go to a competitor's ERP system is looking at a really serious change management bill that is going to stall them from ever driving that to completion, except in a merger and acquisition circumstance. Just isn't going to happen. The real lock-in, the inertia with your people in business. Now, coming back though, occasionally you can rotate on a technology. You can invest too much in interfaces that are custom instead of configured, and they can lock you in. So we avoided that. But you can see our environment here. This was critical to us, having the level of automation to achieve the speed and quality to satisfy the expectations of our executives, because they use this catchphrase. They want evidence at the speed of relevance, and that's whatever speed it changes in real time. So if it's changing on a yearly basis, okay, fine, update it yearly. But if it's changing on a nanosecond basis, microsecond basis, then that's the speed at which you need to be able to. We had to build this set of tools for data engineering to support the pipeline, for software engineering to support the algorithms, and all of the elements of the life cycle, including a highly self-service user experience. And so when I talk about the capability we've got, the data sandbox and the tool set, a lot of people get interested and like to understand where we are. This is where we are today. Now, come back in 12 to 18 months, you're going to see a different tool set. And that's because of the rate of change. It's not because we don't like any of these. We like them as much as we like anything that's out there. We dislike them as much as we dislike anything out there. But this is where we landed today. In 12 to 18 months, things will be different. And we'll be using different tools and different techniques to go with them. But as I say, people often ask, what does your tool stack look like? This is what our tool stack look like. Be really interested in hearing what your tool stack look like if we get a chance to follow up, either in the question and answer session or through email after the event is over. Be really interested in learning from you what approaches you've taken. Now, it's hard to talk about technologies without thinking about what is going to come next. That's really critical when we think about technologies. So let's move ahead to transformation vector number 7 and talk about a view of best-in-class technologies. Now, this view comes from CB Insights, and my use of view is not meant as of CB Insights as an advisory firm. I got to say that, or the lawyers get after me. However, it's a really good view, and it's an interesting perspective into the up-and-coming technologies. Now, every vendor featured in this annual publication from CB Insights, every vendor has their products at general availability. You can go out and rent them today. You can lease them today. You can buy them today. They are available to you to use. You can go to their sites, and almost every one of these will let you play online with a living version of it in a demo setting. But it's the actual software. You can see its performance. And here's the interesting thing for me. As much as I work very carefully to stay in contact with the big venture capitalists and understand their portfolio companies, there's just not enough time to cover them all. Folks like CB Insights provide a valuable view for you, for me, in that they give a broad set of coverage. And this is, again, this is a snapshot, but here's what's important to understand. While all of these are general availability, there's no guarantee any of them are going to be in business next year, because the competition is utterly fierce and it's driving this massive pace of innovation. So if you think about it, I looked over the last several years, and I actually have a note here on the slide, only 25% of the firms you see here were in the prior year's top 100. And if you look at the prior year's top 100, only 25% of those were in the previous year's top 100. That's how rapidly the change is happening. That's how many more firms there are already out there with offerings at general availability that you could go get today if you only knew where they were. They're already out there. They just didn't make it into the top 100 in this particular picture. But the bigger message I have for you is that you and I both have a challenge. Now, the way I put that challenge is in the culture I came into in the DoD, there's this sense of there's a product, all we have to do is buy this thing and install it and start to use it, and we're good. I mean, let's face it, we fly the B-52 Stratofortress. That thing is 70 years old. And the last B-52 Stratofortress pilot has not been born yet. We're going to be flying them for a long time. We hold on to our hardware platforms, and we hold on to our IT platforms. So this idea that you need to stay abreast of the rapid pace of change in the world of data science is something that the department and the federal government's cadences are not built around. They're built around the idea of buying something and then squeezing that thing forever. And that's a good thing to do. And look, we're not alone. I worked in the chemical process industry for a long time, And they have the exact same mental model. You invest in capital resources, capital assets, and you protect those assets as long as they're on your balance sheet, and you try to keep them forever. In this world, you and I both know that's simply not acceptable, because our competitors, and we do use that term, by the way, our competitors shoot at us, mind you, but they're our competitors. Our competitors are always after the latest in data science technologies. And so we have to be after the latest in data science technologies. And part of the cultural change is inculcating the fact that we are all in the Red Queen's race here. Remember the line from Alice in Wonderland, that's where the Red Queen says, here you see, you have to run just as fast as you can, only to stay in place. And if you want to get somewhere, you have to run twice as fast. Well, that's the case for you and I. We know that. Part of the cultural change was helping the department understand that. Helping the department understand we need to stay plugged in with venture capitalists. Helping them understand we need to stay in touch with the emerging best-in-class technologies. We need to be constantly experimenting. We need to be constantly testing. We need to be constantly rolling new innovations into production. Major cultural change, a major shift for us, and one we've been quite successful at. There's now a significant appetite for these kinds of considerations right across the department. And I have to say, it's quite gratifying to be part of that change. I'm part of a much larger team, mind you, and we're all working very hard, many dedicated data science professionals and data practitioners. But it's been powerful to watch the department shift into an understanding of the value of staying current with best-in-class technologies. All right, let us talk about transformation vector number 8. And this goes to internal processes. This goes to the cadence with which decision-making was made and is made now in the department. And I just want to shine a bit of a spotlight. The upper row is what things were like when I came in. And we would do data analytic projects with internal resources, or we would bring in external resources, the big names, you know, the names you would recognize, the McKinseys, the BCGs, Deloitte, Accenture, EY, Booz Allen Hamilton, bring in all the big names. I mean, we use them all. And you would see this sequence across the top. And the sequence was even happening in these quarterly briefings to the most senior executive forums inside the department. Some executive would need to make a decision or deliver a presentation. They'd kick off a project, identify some of the critical business questions they needed to have answered. And then some poor human beings would have to start making phone calls, sending emails to ask for data that they could use to help answer the question. That might go for 6 weeks of data calls, efforts to get people to respond, followed by 6 weeks of scrubbing what they got, because it would come in different formats and different structures, you name it, in terms of file types. So there was a lot of manual artisanal effort to somehow mash all this stuff together, even when they did it every quarter. A lot of artisanal effort. But they would then create some kind of a common schema to answer the question. So the example I'm using here, LOB stands for line of business, as in other words, financial management, HR management, IT management, those lines of business. Code is cost decision framework. It's a schema for looking at cost data. And then grind all of the data through a set of tools into this common schema, do all the transforms, do all of the validations, and then start to generate PowerPoints, because I got to tell you, the Department of Defense still loves PowerPoints. We got PowerPoints. If they were a weapon of mass destruction, we would be on top of the world. Generate PowerPoints and then go out and sell those through these supermarket tools. So tell everybody, look at the wonderful content we got. Well, we try to revolutionize that whole cycle of analytics. It still all starts with executive sponsors, and it still all starts with their critical business questions. But because we're the Department of Defense, we also now apply some really important filters: the National Defense Strategy, or NDS, the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that tells us how much money we have to spend and what we must spend it on. This is not optional. It tells you what you will spend it on. Evaluation plans, learning agendas, those kinds of things now imposed as filters, triggering not projects, but processes. If the data is not already fed into that repository I showed you, we turn on automated data feeds. We don't go ask people to send us spreadsheets and PowerPoints or anything else. We find the authoritative source and we get a data feed turned on at an agreed rate. That's speed of relevance. We automate the transforms from the very beginning. There's no manual activity. It's all about code. It's all about scripts. We bring together multiple different types of schemas, and we have shifted from contractor-owned, contractor-operated tools to making them use our tools in that sandbox I showed you, that toolbox I showed you back on Transformation Vector 6. They now use our tools in our environment, provide live visualizations from the very beginning. And those then end up in those executive forums. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner, I name one of the executive forums, the DMAG, the Deputies Management Action Group. It's a very important internal set of decisions made in that particular meeting. And the reality is, when I came to the department, they were looking, in the DMAGs, they were looking at slides that were generated over the process up above that might be 4 months old. By the time, the data might be 4 months old by the time the discussion happens. Today, it's live data, live feeds. They're looking at those visualizations on the fly. So it's a significant change in terms of the way we operate things internally. Now, I've highlighted 8 different transformation vectors that we have made significant progress on since last year and over the 2 years I've been there. That's let me shine a bit of a spotlight on the analytics side of this, not just the data side of this, and I hope that's been useful for you. Robert, I think we've been getting some questions in, and we wanted to save some time here for questions and answers, so let's do that.
We do. We've got about 8 minutes left. I will ask people to use the Slido chat down below, and I'll be able to copy the questions over for Michael. Just a question initially from one of our attendees. Are you working with a Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, ? Are you leveraging other Transaction Authority, OAT, contracts in lieu of the FAR-based contracts?
So there was 2 questions in there, and the answer to both those questions is yes. We're working with the Defense Innovation Unit. We're working with its peers in places like the Army Futures Command. We're working with In-Q-Tel, which is an arm of the DoD that makes investments in technology firms. We're actively collaborating with every part of the department that we can, and sharing views, sharing challenges, learning from one another. You asked about alternate contracting authorities. Yes, we love alternate contracting authorities. My friends in acquisition are not really happy with me because I do a lot of that. And it makes it harder for them to, and I don't mean to be, please don't think I'm being critical of them. Their job is to track how people spend the money. These other authorities make it harder for them to track. And so it's uncomfortable for them. But the ultimate value proposition, in my eyes, is speed of impact. And so anything that lets me move fast with quality, I will always do. And so, yes, I do use those alternate contracting authorities. Just like I use alternate hiring authorities. I'm very assertive about wanting to move as fast as I can move with quality.
Excellent. Just in the last minute, I've got a question from Florian. Michael, might be good to separate out the CapEx from the hardware versus software open source solutions in LLP or SAT images with transformation deep learning. Is that more of a statement rather than just a comment there, Michael?
Well, it does sound like a statement, but I'll say this. Never buy what you can rent. And so we are we've moved that repository into a public cloud, and we are rapidly shifting out those COTS products for native services. Where native services aren't available, we do like to use open source tools. But the cost of the open source tools is not in the in COTS tools is not in the upfront purchase price. It's in the total lifecycle cost. It's in the training of your people. It's in the support that you need to have predictability in your production solutions. And so I'm neither for nor against open source. I looked at the total lifecycle cost, and as much as possible, I would prefer to rent over lease or buy, and I would prefer in the case of data science, so much of the algorithms you need are already available in an open source fashion, and we do grab those as rapidly as they're available.
Great. Here's a good one that's come in. Question number 2. How do your analytics handle a vast amount of data, potential intelligence without lag in ingest times?
Well, so fundamentally what you want to do is push the first round of processing as far out on the edge as you possibly can. You need to be pre-processing that data before it moves, because we have to cope with the reality that the speed of light isn't just a good idea. It's the law. There are limits on how fast you can move data and how much data you can move. So you want to process it as close to the edge as possible, get insights you can act on out at the edge to minimize propagation delay. Beyond that, then you have to start being judicious about how much of that data you move and where you move it. The reality is that there are so many options. The critical thing is not trying to get it to your premise. There are plenty of compute options available across the wide area that are just off of the edge, where you can knit together a fabric and do a whole lot of processing without having to move that data very far. And that's where the really interesting innovations are in terms of data management fabrics and so forth. I think I answered the spirit of that question and pretty close to the specifics of it.
Just before we go to our last question, Michael, I have I just loaded up your kind of profile there. If people wanted to get a hold of you afterwards and communicate, is there a good way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 good ways for people to get a hold of me. Well, one good way is to connect to me on LinkedIn. I get in there once or twice a week, so I will see your messages. But another way is to just send me an email. My work email address is michael.j.conlin10, so CONLIN10, .civ@mail.mil. So Michael J. Conlin10.civ@mail.mil, and I will get your email, and I'd be very happy to exchange thoughts, exchange views, continue a conversation. I look forward to listening and learning in our dialogue, listening to you and learning from you. And I hope we'll get to a fair exchange of value when that happens.
Michael, I'm going to stop the sharing here, go into that, because we're out of time. So thank you. Thank you for coming back and presenting to the symposium. Your insights are fantastic. The work that you've done is leading edge, pulling together that whole matrix and understanding of the DoD and the Department of Defense, as I might call it, as I'm a Canadian. It's just fantastic. So you've done a lot of great work. I know there's a lot of people on the call here that would like to reach out to you. So on behalf of the symposium, thank you for your time. We hope that you'll stick around over the next couple of days and enjoy meeting some of the other panelists and seeing them and interacting with them. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent.
Thank you, Robert.
I appreciate it. Thank you.